Thank you, Mary. That was a wonderful introduction, and half of that is not true and a lot of marketing spin. But no, thank you, Kirk, as well for hosting us. We think it's great to be able to be at local events like this. So I'll give you a little bit more background about the company, and I'll try to keep this as short as possible because I'm sure there are lots of questions in the audience. PrecisionHawk was founded in 2010. Bob Young is a name that might ring a bell in this audience. He is our current CEO and chairman, and he was the original investor in the company. And so we have a lot of ties here to the Raleigh area, and it is something real special. So, thank you, Alex. We're a drone company, but we're not a drone company, is kind of the second sentence that we always deliver. We really focus on providing an end-to-end solution, and it's really all about information. And that information is really what drives us as a company to create a lot of value for a lot of industries, and I'll get into those in a minute. Keep rolling, Alex. So let's talk about this end-to-end solution. So it really starts with capturing all the data that you need, and we do that with a drone. However, with that drone, we can pair that with satellite data. So there's lots of government satellites that are constantly collecting terrestrial data, and we have paired the two of those together to really then start to do the analysis, which is the middle of this chart. And in that analysis is where all the value is created. So we have lots of data scientists on our team that really dive in and work on figuring out different spectral signatures and what that might tell a farmer, or what that might tell an oil and gas company. And then we deliver those back to that end user in a very simple format. You essentially just click one button and your question is answered, almost like an app in your app store. So we have apps, if you will. They tend to focus on telling a farmer if there's a disease in his field, telling a farmer if he may need to replant his crop, or any of the decisions that he's making on an annual basis that really focus on driving value into his farm. So let's start with the drone. So we actually have our UAV, or a model of our UAV here today, standing up on the table, and we can talk about it a little bit. It looks kind of big, but it actually weighs very little. It's mostly foam and some printed circuit board. It is essentially a flying computer. Underneath the UAV is where the sensor is held, almost in the belly of the plane. And what we have specialized in is integrating lots of different types of sensors. Because when we're talking about the questions that the farmer was going to ask, do I need to replant? Do I have disease in my field? They actually need to capture different types of data in order to answer those questions. So we have designed, Ernie, our founder, and Chris, have designed this UAV to essentially be interchangeable to collect lots of different types of data. An example of that would be you pop in and out the sensors like you do a cordless drill battery. So you kind of move from job to job. We do it with sensor technology. Let's go to the next one. But as I talked about, it's not really about the UAV itself. It's about all of the data that you can capture. And what we have done is really develop an enterprise mapping solution. And that solution really starts to focus on different types of data. So I'll give you an example. A farmer, we'll stick with the farmer, is looking to understand the water content or the soil moisture content that's in his field. And he does that before the season even starts. And so he would fly the UAV, and he would fly it with a ground-penetrating radar unit. Well, that looks a lot different than the maps that you see there. And what our kind of cloud-based platform is really designed to do is take these different layers of data, layer them on top of each other, and then run analysis on all of them. Because although it's of the same field that has been flown, the data is collected in a very different way. A radar unit scans, a camera, a light-based sensor takes reflectance signatures, and then we even have hyperspectral sensors. They collect 270 bands of light constantly. So to think of that in a term we all understand, that's 20 gigabytes of data every 2 minutes of flight. And so there often is a lot of data that is collected, and that will lead us to the next chart. And so what we don't want to do is just hand data to a farmer. What you really need to hand is an insight. And so this is where we set up this what we call an algorithm marketplace or an app store. That app store is designed to answer those questions. So the question of, should I replant my field? It actually is a very straightforward question to ask, however, a difficult question to answer. There are lots of factors that go into whether a farmer should replant or not. How much does their seed cost? What did they plant originally? What is the season indicators for weather? What's the soil moisture content of their field? And so what we have done is really distill all of that into them asking the question and then rendering back the answer to them. All right, let's go to the next one. So I talked a little bit about the industries in which we focus, and I've given you a lot on agriculture to date. North Carolina is a very important agriculture state, and so we tend to focus on that messaging with this type of audience. But we do work in lots of other areas as well. So I mentioned oil and gas. We also do work in insurance, in livestock, in forestry. We're actually even breaking into mining. Mines are often trying to detect very, very exact amounts of change. How many cubic feet or meters did I extract from my mine today? Our UAV can actually calculate that automatically. And so we tend to do a lot of work in all of these industries. I'll pause for a second on insurance because it's an interesting one. And all of the detection is change-based. So I mentioned the satellite data feeds that we also are able to incorporate. So if a hurricane, unfortunately, came up the eastern seaboard and affected, let's say, Wilmington, North Carolina, we are actually working with deployment teams. So when the first responders go in to understand what exactly has happened after some type of catastrophic event, we send a team of pilots with our UAV alongside them. And they are, in a sense, providing a different perspective to those first responders, because those first responders tend to be on the ground trying to obviously maintain or save as many lives as possible, and then understand what it looks like from an infrastructure or rebuilding perspective. Them doing their ground surveys and us doing aerial surveys together is actually a very powerful thing, because one of the things that isn't often talked about is actually the danger that exists to first responders. Coming into areas where you don't know what the infrastructure is like. You don't know if a gas pipe is leaking. You don't know if this building is actually structurally sound and will stand if they enter it. All of these data products that we talk about tend to focus on rendering back those exact answers to those users in the field. So although I talked about our data platform being cloud-based, you can actually run a lot of this analysis in the field right with you when you don't have any connectivity, because as we all know, if there is a catastrophic event, most communication channels are also down afterwards. So I want to get back to farming real quick. So this chart kind of lays out exactly what we focus on as a company. And I talked about change in a catastrophic event perspective, but let's talk about good change in an agriculture perspective. So obviously early in the season, as you can see from the far left side of the image, there's a couple spots in that field that look maybe a little bit suspect. And so a farmer would want to monitor those spots of the field and start to ask questions of why are those spots of the field maybe underperforming as compared to others. Then we move into the middle of the season, and in the middle of the season, it becomes a little more apparent where there are problems and maybe where there aren't problems. And then as we move to the end of the season, you can see very clearly where the corn is really harvestable and where it frankly is not. And so we look at this change, and then we also look at very, very specific resolutions, kind of more on an X, Y, or geospatially, because most farmers actually have what's called variable rate technology. And that variable rate technology, as they move across the field with their planter or sprayer, can actually apply differently based on where they are. So an example would be, in the first picture, a farmer may decide that where the corn is actually less green, I need to apply more fertilizer to give it kind of a boost. And where the corn is more green, it does not need more fertilizer. It will not uptake it. In a sense, it would just sit on the soil and with the next major rain event, run off into our streams. And so The pairing of this, so just like the first responders, our technology is not standalone. It pairs with other technologies. The pairing of this technology with precision agriculture technology, which is the area that I came from before joining PrecisionHawk, really is incredibly powerful for a farmer. It can have them save inputs and maximize their yield, which is really the goal. If there are any farmers in the room, I'm sure they're aware of the fact that commodity prices have come down significantly lately, and that puts a lot of pressure on a farmer's bottom line, so they need to become more and more efficient with everything they do. And so we believe that this technology that you're seeing over there can be a great complement to things they're already doing on their fields. So let's step back and talk a little bit about the industry. So the UAV industry is an interesting one. If you read, there are lots of reports that say in the United States by 2025 there's going to be $80-something billion worth of value created by UAVs. That ranges in applications. It's kind of like cell phones. There's a lot of value created by cell phones, except some of us use them for banking, some of us use them for communications, some of us use them in emergency response situations. And we believe that the same is true for UAVs. We have primarily focused on those industries that I laid out before, and really on the information gathering capability that a UAV has. But everybody in the room, I'm sure, is aware that Amazon wants to deliver your packages via drone. And actually, I think they're well on their way to doing that. There are lots of applications for UAVs themselves, and we believe that there is an opportunity for this type of economic value to be created in the United States. With that comes a little bit of a challenge, right? Because just like cell phones, we didn't even know all of the capabilities that existed when we started out with cell phones. When we think of that from an information gathering perspective, probably all of the wonderfully neat things drones can do, we haven't even thought of yet, which is a great place to be as an industry, but it's something we need to be cautious about, right? Because as we all know, we need to keep our airspace safe. And so we're actually, I don't know if everybody in this room is aware, but we're actually partnered directly with the FAA. PrecisionHawk is partnered directly with the FAA to help solve that challenge. So right now, current regulatory limits say you need to keep your drone where you could essentially see it, because most people fly them with a little joystick. However, there could be a lot of value created to allow your drone to maybe scan your whole field or maybe two fields in a row at once and then come back and land. So we're actually working with the FAA on a technology we call Lattice, and Lattice stands for Low Altitude Tracking and Avoidance System. The FAA loves acronyms. And so we played right into that. And so Lattice is really focused on keeping the airspace safe. And why we think that is important is because unless Lattice or technologies like Lattice are enabling safe drone flight, we will never get to these amazing things that I'm sure some student at MIT or Elon or Brown University, I'm trying to hit on all the alumni that I've heard of thus far, or NC State or UNC or Duke, depending upon who else is in the room, are already working on trying to solve these challenges. We believe as a company that we can help enable those things by keeping our airspace safe. And then lastly, I guess I'll leave you with a couple things. So I mentioned Bob. He's obviously a big believer in this technology. We have a couple other investors as well. Intel Capital, like Intel, the chip maker computer company, and Millennium Technology Venture Fund. Millennium is a big venture fund out of New York City. They very much believe in this technology, and we are looking forward to scaling with them as partners. And with that, I will pause and open it up to questions. Yes?
Developers quite often will find that when they bought property that there might be grave sites that they didn't know about, well underground.
Yes.
Can you determine if there are grave sites?
Yeah, so I don't know specifically about grave sites, but I'll tell you a little bit about our ground penetrating radar capabilities. So essentially what it does is it scans the ground and it penetrates about 6 feet into the ground. And then gives back a 3D contour map of what essentially what is that 6 feet from surface to 6 feet down. So If there was a gravesite, I am sure that there would be some type of kind of signature or contour within that soil that we could detect. So I don't know specifically about the application, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an answer. Yeah.
I've seen that would work for archaeological sites.
Yes, it does. So actually, Mary mentioned I worked in a previous life for Northrop Grumman, and Northrop Grumman makes UAVs that fly really, really high. And they've actually done lots of, whether it's scanning seabeds to detect any type of sunken treasure, if you will, or looking for archaeological sites. Yes, that application has existed for a while. Yes?
How much does it cost?
Yeah, so our little UAV right there is $16,500 without the sensor. It is a flying computer. I mentioned most kind of toy UAVs, you have to fly with a set of joysticks. You actually don't fly our UAV. You put the area that you are interested in on a thumb drive, you plug it in, you walk to that area, it does a safety check and says, am I in the area that you are actually interested in flying? Yes. You hit OK. The motor spins up and you just toss it like a paper airplane. It goes out and it does all of the surveying itself. The reason behind that is the wind conditions at 400 feet, believe it or not, are significantly different than they are on the ground. And so to collect the data you need to do all of this analysis, you really need to understand what are the conditions there. So there's actually an onboard processor that is constantly monitoring wind, humidity, light reflectance, and a lot of other characteristics to make sure that when the sensor is capturing the data, that it can then be calibrated appropriately to do all of the analysis afterwards. If you tried to fly it with the sticks to do that, invariably there would be spots along the survey that wouldn't be collected appropriately.
Is it a battery and electric motor?
Yeah, it's a battery, actually in the kind of front. So I talked about the middle belly is where the sensor just pops in and out, and then the battery pops in and out on the front of the fuselage.
What's to stop a private person from taking their run and looking on someone else's property?
Yep, so that's a tough question to answer. What we do at PrecisionHawk, we make sure that when you put in that area of interest, that you have the ability to access that area. So you either need to prove that you're a lessor of that land. A lot of farmers lease the land on which they farm, or the owner of that property. And then we actually only give you back the data exactly to the border of that property. So even if the UAV happened, although it tends to not, but even if it happened to take some picture that was of somebody else's field, we actually don't give that back to the user or the operator of the drone. We give it back just for the area that they're interested in. As an industry, though, that's a tough question. I mentioned how we're working on the safety case with the FAA and really trying to make our airspace safe, because there's going to be a lot of these in the future up there. There's an initiative coming out of the White House on drone policy for privacy. We have engaged in discussions with those folks to date. I think there's a lot of smart people working on that exact challenge. Our technology kind of already fits with where I believe they are going, but I'm not a policymaker, and so it's hard for me to judge on where that will exactly end up.
Are there any implications for this technology as far as marine fisheries are concerned?
I'm sorry, the
Marine
last...
fisheries.
Yes, actually a significant application. So I talked about the capability to determine whether or not you need to replant. Essentially, what happens on the drone itself is it does a very sophisticated counting of the plants that are in your field, literally down to the exact number of stalks that have come out of the ground. You could use that for fisheries. So if you wanted to understand yield coming out of a fishery, or understand maybe disease pressure that's affecting size of fish, you could do essentially the same thing, but just fly the drone over the fishery itself.
What altitude does it fly, and how does it land?
Yep.
Landing?
Yeah, so because I'll answer the landing question first. So because it's so light, it just literally does a simple belly flop. It comes in very, very slow. This UAV does not fly very fast. You'd actually kind of be amazed at how slow it flies. And it just is designed to come in. If it was a mature cornfield, it'll literally just sit on top of the corn. That's how light it is. It's a couple pounds. So it flies where regulatory limits are today is either at the 200 foot or 400 foot level. So depending upon the application, you either fly at those two heights. We have operations in Canada. Canada has opened up airspace up to 650 feet. And so we've flown it at that altitude, and then we've done testing at other altitudes, when regulators are aware of that. It will never fly very high. If you noticed, all of those altitudes that I just described are quite low. It's designed to fly low because it needs to capture the data such that in order to get that resolution, it needs to fly that low.
Does the consumer lease the aircraft or buy it from you? Lease the program or the whole box?
Yeah, so we do a couple different things. We will sell you a UAV with a sensor, and we'll train you on how to fly it. However, current regulation says you must be a certified pilot in order to fly a UAV and get an exemption to fly a UAV. PrecisionHawk does have that exemption from the FAA. And so there are a lot of people that do not want to go through that process. And so to date, we also provide a service where we will come out and fly the UAV for you and give you the data that is captured and then the algorithms and apps that you need for that. So we do a little bit of both. Yes,
Sorry?
yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
What is the size of your company now, and what do you anticipate in 3 years, capital or revenue, or something like that?
Sure. So the way I answer that question is our first quarter of this year was bigger than our entire last year. And our second quarter was about double what our first quarter was. So we are, pardon the pun, growing like a weed. And so, we will need future injections of capital. I mentioned our current investor base. They are absolutely on board with continuing to invest. But we are actually in the process of raising our next round of funding and having those discussions today.
Are you only fixed wing, or do you
Yeah, so
go get a rotor? Or?
nope, so this is a great question. So as you can see, we make a fixed wing craft today. There are a lot of UAV manufacturers that make rotorcraft. For the applications that we're focused on, fixed wing tends to be the best system, if you will, to capture that data. However, it's obviously something we're interested in. There are applications where a rotorcraft works better. We tend to not focus on those today, but I wouldn't say we won't focus on them in the future.
Well, and the data platform, I was thinking, the data platform right now, we're trying to make it, the software platform, UAV agnostic. And so
Yes.
we're working towards allowing them to upload their data, even if they have a quadcopter or a different type.
Yeah, so this is a great point by Alex. I talked about we have an end-to-end platform. We really mean that. And Bob, being the original investor in the company, Red Hat is a big open platform. We see PrecisionHawk in the same light. And instead of it being a PC, it happens to be a flying PC, but it's the same thing. It's capturing data, processing data, and giving users the ability to fly essentially whatever craft they want. Again, I mentioned satellite data. You could also fly a manned aircraft if you wanted to. We can do and use all of those analysis tools and systems to still get you the answers you need.
Have any of the coastal cities contacted you for Shark Watch?
Yes, that was a That was a big one. I'll go one step further. We did not release this publicly, but there was a lot of internal talk about, oh, how could we do something here? I mentioned these data scientists. They actually put together a solution. You could fly. So that's why I know the answer to your fisheries question. We were actually able to count sharks in the water. We took historical satellite data, ran it through all of our processing capabilities, and just counted sharks on the coastline. So yes, we could do it. No, we have not deployed to do it. So I don't want that rumor going out there. We do not count sharks. I know you had a question earlier.
I think that implications for forestry are pretty obvious.
Yes.
What sort of a take are you getting from forestry clients?
Yes, so forestry is an emerging business for us. I talked about the counting capability. I heard an estimate that a redwood tree's value is something on the order of magnitude of $100,000 per tree. We're counting corn plants that are worth cents at best. So obviously there is a strong incentive for a forest to know exactly how many, or a forester to know exactly how many trees they have, and how fast their inventory is maturing, because it's a big logistics challenge going forward on harvesting those trees. So hopefully that answers your question.
I'd like a couple of redwood trees.
Yeah, wouldn't we all? When I found that out, I wasn't asked. Yeah.
Lawrence, maybe the last question?
What kind of navigational equipment do these drones have to keep from covering the same ground twice?
Yeah, so on board, there's actually several things. We do triangulation from cell phone towers. We have a GPS unit built on board, and then we actually have the capability, even in GPS denied environments, to know where we have been, so it can always kind of return home. Because in some scenarios, you could potentially have a GPS blockage or lock failure, and so we have the ability to kind of drop breadcrumbs on where we've been, and so that way we could come back.
Mary or Bonnie, Jim?
I can answer that. Well, my question was very simple. Can you use the technology that you have in the drone and put it into a small aircraft so you can get higher and meet FAA standards?
Yes, we could. Absolutely.
Mary, last question. Great question.
Just a quick one. You picked North Carolina to grow this business. You could go anywhere. What is the state of North Carolina doing to keep you here and to make it easy for you or not?
Yeah, so different states have different policies when it comes to drones. North Carolina is currently in the process of enacting legislation that would make every drone operator get a permit in the state. We obviously would comply with all of those permitting regulations. Other states do not have that permitting process. I don't know which one's better. Again, that's hard to determine. No, the airspace is actually governed federally. I don't know if you know that, but the FAA is the only authority that has airspace control. And so the United States tends to act as one. The permitting process for operators, I think, is maybe where states might differ. And North Carolina is essentially setting up a driver's test for a UAV. And so, we'll oblige and meet those regulations.
All right.
Thank you very much.